Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. Happy Catty Crypto here. So welcome to another podcast episode. I've got Zaradar on as promised, and really it's we've all got so many questions for Zaradar, and developers like themselves, they're just so busy. So when we can get them, it really is nice. Zaradar, thank you so much for coming on and welcome back to the show. It's been a while. You're so busy all the time. How are you? How are things going? Thanks for being here.
Hey mate, thanks. Well, it's nice to be back, first of all. I'm doing good, busy. I started a new job about a month and a half ago now, which is doing great actually. Lots of nice new colleagues. It's nice to actually, work on the inside of the crypto ecosystem for a change with one of the big institutional players. That gives me, some more perspective on how that side of things work, which is not typically accessible to the outside. And then at the same time, it allows me to spend more time working with and around staking technologies. I think I told you this a while back, but one of the main reasons why I took the job was because I'm working in the staking team, which means I get to work with Cosmos SDK chains all day. And that obviously also helps me better understand the ecosystem and the technology that our own blockchain is based on, you could say. So I'm doing good, thank you.
It's good to hear that. It's really good to hear that. And we're at this point now where there's people putting forward ideas, which is amazing, and everyone's really been waiting for what you've got in store really for a repeg proposal. So do you want to talk to us a little bit just about the Terra Classic USTC repeg proposal and realistically what your envisionment is of where this could all go, where it could be?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess to start out, first we'll have to rewind the clock a bit to the early days after the crash, so to speak, where a lot of us got together and formed the Terra Rebels, and we started working on many different teams. And one of the teams that I was fortunate enough to be part of was the quant team, which was originally headed by Fafi, and then we were working with Alex and some other guys, basically talking about different economic theories and formulas and strategies that we could somehow, apply to create a better version of the algorithm. And as these guys sort of shared their vast amount of knowledge in the space with me, and I paired it with my technical understanding of things, it quickly became apparent to me that most likely a lot of the challenges we had in our network was our inability to basically regulate our capital flows. So if you think about how the ATM system works, you're only allowed to, withdraw a certain amount of money every day. If there's a bank run, they can close off the ATM systems and so on. And after, looking at all that, I came to the conclusion that the most important thing for us was to find a way to be able to throttle our liquidity flows during periods of high volatility. And this was where the idea of the ABS keeper came about through lots of long conversations with Fafi and Alex and Ed and a lot of other people. And then somewhere around May or August, I sat down and I sort of wrote that up. But another thing that we also discussed back and forth was how to sort of recapitalize the system and create this on-chain DEX, which could substitute the role of LFG in the old system. And in that process, we sort of came to different conclusions on how to do it. I was always of the opinion that we didn't really have had the luxury of being able to issue more liquidity or sell more tokens to generate investment, because we already had more than enough tokens to go around. And this was why I always tried to focus on saying, how could we build the system in such a way that we could sort of generate liquidity flows that could, not necessarily be subject to the volatility, but at the same time also help prop up the liquidity as a whole. And then after talking with a range of different DApp teams who wanted to come on chain, it became clear to me that what most of these guys wanted and needed to get going was basically just the ability to integrate with LUNC. But the problem with that was that they would inherently then inherit all of our volatility, right? Let's say somebody came along and built a successful business, and they started pumping up the price because a lot of people bought into that business. Then most likely long-term holders would come out of the woodworks at some point and start dropping the price, which would maybe scare off new customers. I don't know. And this is then where the idea of the partition pool came in, because that gave us a way to start generating these liquidity flows without necessarily exposing them to our, inherent volatility. And this is what, as I said, created the idea for the partition pools. And then I started looking at how I could combine those with the ABS keeper to make it so that we could set up remittance corridors and very narrowly control the liquidity flows between these new partition pools and their commodity tokens, and then the sort of USTC market, which could then act as a bridge currency. Because given that we have proposal 3568, which states that we should only have 10 billion LUNC in circulation, we will, as mentioned before, implement a hard cap on that, which means that it will take a long time before you can swap anything back into LUNC. And that basically means that these commodity tokens would be incentivized to use USTC as a reserve currency. And that would then allow USTC to, generate some taxes. And if you get enough of these partition pools running with enough business growth, then all of a sudden the system runs out of dollars, and then 10 billion USDC is no longer enough. So that was sort of the idea behind the design, and the missing piece of it was just me trying to figure out how to make these partition pool work in a way where they would always guarantee an outcome that would result in less primary money supply than we had before. So because the benefit of that is that it would create a sort of spam protection construction, wherein you as an entrepreneur would not be incentivized to start filling up a partition pool if you couldn't get the business running, because nobody would buy your commodity tokens, which you just minted by buying LUNC and then selling that to mint these tokens, because the pool started at zero. And that means that if you never crush that threshold, then the pool basically just becomes like a small pocket of frozen value, right? Inherently, if the business dies out, the partition gets left behind, and all the liquidity below the threshold simply just gets stuck. Whereas, partition pools that get to grow their business and go above the threshold, they will then be allowed to trade in to the USTC market, so they can start, generating whatever value for themselves in terms of earning, the whole pay to earn thing, or swapping it into other commodity pools to either fill them up or just trade into their universes, because each of these partition pools are inherently just closed financial systems that are servicing virtual economies. So that was sort of the last few pieces I had to get together, and then I presented that for Ed and Max. We had a few talks, and then I had some more talks with Max about it, because Max he actually has a university degree in economics, so he's a very nice person for me to work with on that side of things. And we sort of came to the conclusion that the design, due to its mechanical nature, would actually function as intended, and it would allow us to then slowly start to create a process where new startups can come in, make their pool, buy some LUNC, create some tokens in their pool, sell those tokens using the wallet, because the commodity tokens are just regular protocol tokens at the end of the day. And then people can then, transact within that closed pool, so they can send it to other wallets who can then also hold these tokens. But the tokens can never really be traded into anything until the market cap of the pool gets above a certain size. And then all the spillage, as I like to call it, meaning all the liquidity in the pool that is above the threshold, which is set by the governance layer, can then trade in and out of these pools, thus providing the sort of liquidity flows into USTC, which will result in swap taxes and probably also a new utility tax that we're going to introduce. Because at the end of the day, what this all amounts to is a closed financial network for startups that can work on our chain or on our network and have instant access to all our users and wallets and so on. And that, for me at least, I think is a large enough value proposition to say, hey, we've got one of the biggest networks in the world. Our gas costs are fairly cheap considering the price of our token. Why not just come over and start building on this thing? Because, that gives you access to 1 million plus users that you can start enticing to use your application or play your game or whatever.
I really like your idea, and I know Ed's already he started following this route, hasn't he, of having both USTN, the partition pools kind of thing. So I really do believe that this is the best possible route. And then, like you're saying, it's gonna not only do what it's saying it's going to do, but it's going to bring and it's going to incentivize people to say, hey, look at this blockchain technology, it's really good, come and use it. I'm really, really stoked. So the fact you're not following, and there's a massive, there was a huge uproar about it. I don't know if you're aware, but there was someone who made a video and they were like, they're going to mint coins. It's been passed. And what would you say to people about proposals at Zaradar? How do proposals work for us on the chain? Because I know a lot of people think that they can put a proposal up and it affects, a CEX. Can you sort of explain, why it doesn't?
There's basically two types of proposals, right? And I'll get to the SEX part afterwards. But there's two types of proposals. There's text proposals, and then there is parameter proposals, right? And the text proposals are literally like going to the town hall square and putting up a poster saying, hey, I want to say something. People can vote for it. If everybody votes for it, then it passes consensus, and then in theory somebody should implement the work, right? That the problem is that this theory is typically based on the fact that somebody has the financial capacity to do so, vis-a-vis the dev team that spawned the chain, because again they have all the tokens. That is clearly not the case in our situation. So what happens is that if a community vote text proposal passes that is clearly, solid in nature and is clearly not spam or trying to be destructive, then we start working on implementing it at the pace that we are capable of, right? A governance proposal or a parameter change proposal, on the other hand, has a slightly different characteristic to it. This is more akin to a configuration change. This is why also many people are arguing that proof of stake systems in general are securities, because it's managed by token owners and you're configuring the system for, basically earnings at the end of the day. But the parameter system can be changed through votes, and that is obviously something that can have an effect on the system. If you were to change the wrong parameters, you could make it very expensive to transact on the chain. You could literally make it, I guess, almost free to transact on the chain. That would then run into the problem of the gas cost not being dynamic, so no validators would take your transaction. And you could also, blacklist people's wallets. You could whitelist new tokens. You could do a whole lot of things with parameter things and stuff like that in general. And this is probably, more of the critical layer. Now, with regards to the sexes, they sit off chain, right? And I've said many times before, there's nothing that our network can do to off-chain participants other than denying them service, right? That means that obviously an adversary who did something at the governance level could make it so that all of Binance's wallets got blacklisted. That would make the wallets unable to transact and freeze, trillions of tokens. That would not be a very good thing, obviously. But this is an example of how the governance system could inherently hurt an off-chain participant, but it's not something. It's not like we could somehow, alter their network or force them to collect a burn tax or something like that. The best we could do is, or the worst we could do is threaten them with denial of service, right? And then it would stop there. But that would also sever the business relationship and possibly make whoever we decided to blacklist go somewhere else, right? So inherently blacklisting is more for bad actors, I guess you could say.
Yeah, for the pretty much I've explained a few times about, proposals only really being, to actually affect our chain unless we blacklist or whitelist wallets and coins and stuff. So let's talk a little bit, Zaradar, about AFTs, because if you Google AFT, you're normally given a cryptocurrency coin to do with apes. And there's a lot of people who sit there and go, what is an AFT, Jay? What's an AFT? And I feel like it's something you can really get in a bite-sized kind of explanation, Zaradar.
I wish I could, honestly. Let me put it like this. From a technical perspective, yes. AFT is simply just a name that people derive to, and in this context, I wasn't even in the room when they derived to that name, right? For me, the only thing that's really important is that we stop calling it stable coins. And I've been saying this for a long time, right? We need to talk about this as algorithmic tokens, because that makes the US government a bit less prone to think that we are, potentially a problem. So for me, the AFT thing is mainly, semantics. It's mainly about what we want to signal, but it's also about accepting that algorithmic tokens, as I call them, should probably not try to maintain static pegs. They should try to maintain qualities of sound money, meaning that they are low volatility, and you can expect that if you buy $1 in one day, it's still worth $1 tomorrow, right? Because the concept of stable inherently means that we are forced to choose between availability and consistency in our network design due to the aforementioned laws of computer science, right? And if we choose consistency, then we can never get an answer until all of the validator nodes agree on everything. That typically doesn't happen that often. They make consensus once in a while, but they still service transactions. So in this situation, they would only ever be able to receive a transaction, then talk about it for a while, agree on that, and then receive another transaction. That would not be a very performant system, right? In the other end of the scale, which is what most modern distributed systems do, is they choose availability. So they are always open for business, but they accept that they are not always consistent in their design. So if you apply this philosophy on maintaining a fixed price of $1 in a distributed network, then you are violating that law, because you cannot both have a fixed price of $1 and then have the entire distributed network agree on that at the same time all the time, right? Unless you have what we call over collateralization, which is what most of the functional stablecoins do. And then you have a few that have so much liquidity, like Circle and so on, that they can actually defend the market peg and keep it stable within, a few decimals. Which gives you the illusion of a fixed price across the network, but it's only really fixed because you have a market maker in place that keeps it fixed, right? It's the same thing with Tether and so on. So that inherently, I think, is the whole deal with AFTs, is simply just starting a process towards rebranding.
Yeah, this whole stablecoin situation is going to be even more relevant, I think, just to the overall populace and the average Joe in crypto when America really start pushing on those laws. So this always comes into a question at the moment, Zaradar, is are we worried about USTC being dragged into a court case possibly in the future? And would that have any implications for our movement or our coin?
I don't see why it would. I mean, it's clearly the software clearly runs under an Apache 2 license. It clearly states that it's experimental software. The only way we really can get into trouble is if we increase or decrease the USTC or LUNC supplies without a very large majority of voters agreeing on it. Because this is where then we start playing with people's, whatever bags and investment. And that could open us up for certain legal vectors. But I think one thing that a lot of people tend to sometimes misunderstand in all of this, because we have so many different names for it, is that when we look at our chain, for instance, right? I like to call this the tokenomics of Terra. There's only really two types of tokens. There is on-chain tokens. I like to call them protocol tokens. And then there's the CV20 tokens, which just fly around between Cosmos VASM-enabled smart contracts. And if we sort of, just call them algorithmic tokens, and we accept that the protocol tokens can only ever live on the chain they're born on, and the CV20 tokens are basically foreign currency, then I think we'll be okay, right? I think inherently what the US government fears most of all is losing the dollar global reserve status, because they make quite a lot of money off it.
I guess that answers that question then. And that's actually good to hear that, there's not really that worry from yourself, but being in the situation you're in, you understand it better than most of us. So, Zaradar, how do you feel about this Neblio team? They're becoming official supporters of Terra Rebels themselves, and they've made the official announcement saying they'll be providing infrastructure, financial and advisory support. This must be awesome for you guys. This must be like a huge helping hand, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, it's a very good beginning. I think it's like Raider said to me the other day. They got the best possible deal they could get. Neblio has been in the space for a while. They seem determined to help the chain our chain survive and so on. And they're basically putting their money where their mouth is. So I respect that. It allows us to delegate part of that money towards setting up more nodes, so we can slowly start taking over some of the LCD burden, which is currently the subject of debate on Twitter between people like Fatman and myself and so on. Because right now we have a lot of centralized traffic going through the Terra nodes for all the second layer stuff, right? And the Neblio money really helps us, set up redundancies. We're also getting other people who are working on setting up redundancies. But what most people don't realize is that a massive amount of dApps was basically, how can you say, bootstrapped to the TFL endpoint in order to make it easier for these apps to come on-chain, right? But the optimal design for our network would be if each dApp team ran their own full node and queried that directly. Then there would be no centralization in the LCD traffic. There would be no problem for the dApps at all, because they would basically have full control over the database instance that they're talking with, right? So I think that is really where I think that the Neblio money comes in, because it helps us deal with that problem while also providing some capital for like maybe buying some new computers. I mean, personally, I've been working off a laptop for the last 5 months and it's almost about to break down, right? So it'd be nice with a new computer. That would allow me to work faster. We have a dude who lives in Costa Rica. He went across the country get an SSD hard disk so he could actually spin up a validator to do some local testing with the code and so on. I've said this many times before, it's no good if the developers have to work for free and bring money to work, right? And this is again a place where things like the Neblio sponsorship and also the open collective funding and so on really helps out a lot, because that, it allows us to get the basic tools we need and start spinning up some servers and so on to slowly build up this backbone that I've mentioned a few times before, that will allow us to ensure that the chain will never die, which it won't really, even if the LCD shuts down, because the LCD is a layer 2 thing. But also that we can make sure that we have the minimum amount of LCD capacity available to keep the lights on, right? So that means that in case TFL decided to, flip the switch, we would still be able to service the DApps. They might experience, some loss of service once in a while if there's too much traffic on the available LCD endpoints. But I suspect that if TFL actually turned off the LCD, most of the validators that are currently running would basically step in and open up some of their LCD endpoints, because every validator has an LCD endpoint. Again, the only reason why everybody uses the TFL one was because that was the one in the documentation and it was easy.
Yeah, and for the people who are listening right now, so I've currently got LUNC Penguins up in front of me, and the way we're able to gain all this information is by having exactly what you're explaining. And if each DApp has this themselves, they're able to gain the endpoint information themselves without having to go to TFL, so to speak. So
yeah, I would say that any DApp team should be able to run a full node that can have its own copy of the blockchain with its own LCD endpoint for less than $1,000 per month. And if every DApp team did that, our chain would become much stronger, much more decentralized, much more efficient.
Yeah, 100%. I can agree with that, because we're basically providing information, like you're saying, to Lunapunks, but now they're following the route of actually doing it themselves, meaning that they can work way more efficiently. And the matter of the fact is they can actually provide a lot more services on their actual website, which is a launch pad for other things.
I know that's what you're doing. And then this is also why I think stuff like what you guys are doing is super great, because you're embracing the way the architecture was meant to work for DApps. Blockchains are replicated state machines. If everybody called the same LCD endpoint, that's the equivalent of calling a single server to tell you some information when you have 129 other servers in the network you could call instead, right? Or you could just jack in your own server to just have a copy so you can call your local endpoint. So it would actually also give you better performance. So from a design perspective, I'm assuming that most of the DApps that rely on others' LCD endpoints are typically in that situation, because it's not entirely trivial to spin up a validator or even a full node. But this is why I started out building the Terra operator many months ago. You can literally today spin up a local full node in a technology like Kubernetes, or even just using a container like technology like Docker, with some of the tooling we have, with a few lines of or a few commands, right? And that is really what I'm hoping, once we get it, out of beta and into general availability and get it well documented and so on, is what will become the force multiplier in terms of enabling these DApp teams to master the responsibility of running their own full node, right? Which obviously doesn't have the same security concerns, because it's not a validator. It's not really, securing anybody's stake things. It's just a server that downloaded a file and synchronized with the network. So it's basically like running a BitTorrent client, right?
it's already done for you in a sense, right? Like kind of like how Tendermint works. Before Tendermint, everything was rather complicated. Then they put Tendermint in place, and it was kind of like the basic of everything you need is already there. You just need to build on it.
Yeah, you could say that in a sense. I mean, making Byzantine fault tolerant systems is not inherently easy. So Jansuk or whatever his name is and his guys, they did, some fabulous work on building up Tendermint to provide a good platform for people who needed BFT resistant consensus layers without necessarily having the capacity to build it themselves.
And that's what I like about this blockchain. It's a legacy in itself, because what it's left behind is making, the person following the breadcrumb trail, it actually makes the breadcrumbs bigger, easier to see, easier to find, and easier to keep moving forward. We're very fortunate to have someone like yourself, Zaradar. Honestly, like you're saying, you're working off of a laptop, and it shouldn't be like that for our developers. And I've done a few videos recently, trying to say to people, we should be donating a very small amount if we can over to Terra Rebels, because without you guys, we just wouldn't be here. And there's things that have happened that, people don't know about. And, there's always this, you guys are working all the time, all day, every day. And then you have your own jobs, like you have your family, like the rest of us.
I have a, an important day job. I go to work for 8 hours. Then I go home. Then I have to go and shop and cook for my son and clean his laundry and help him with his math homework and do my kung fu a few times a week. And then I do 4 or 5 hours of various coordination management activities in and around the Terra Rebels ecosystem to try to keep various people coordinated and help them solve various technical problems. So I have a full day for sure.
It just never stops, honestly. I swear it just never stops. So, Zada, what do you think? I don't know if you've seen the proposal up for the burn tax reduction.
Is that Akujiro's proposal?
Yeah, 5234. What are your thoughts on this, Zada?
I've said this to you a few times before, my friend. I rarely ever read these proposals.
So
I know what it is about
okay.
in the broad terms. I know Akujiro personally. I mean, he's a great dude. I've always told you guys what the consequences of the burn tax was, right? And now we are here. The consequences has arrived. But as I also said in my proposal, austerity was always a necessary evil. So from my perspective, yes, we need to reduce the tax. How much? I think we need to experiment with that for a while. So I like the idea of, lowering it. And then if it's too low, I mean, we can always pop it up again. Because inherently, as we've talked about before, I don't know exactly the amount of burn tokens right now, but what is it, like 10, 20 billion, something like that?
1 second. It's currently sitting at, it is 18 billion, including the tax, 18.4 billion.
Yeah. So that in itself is obviously impressive, right? It's higher than I personally expected, but it's still not enough. And this is why long term, the tax should be set to something that stimulates growth, because the burn tax will not solve the oversupply problem. The other ideas that we're working on will, right? So for me, I think the tax is being experimented with. In Columbus 3, it was set to an insanely low level to attract people to the network. Then, with the burn tax, we put it at 1.2%. That was possibly too high. Now we're going to try and put it down. I think at the end of the day, Akujiro's proposal is probably well written. Knowing Akujiro himself, I think I like the idea of diverging some of the funds from the taxes into infrastructure and utility. think we've talked about this subject before, on the subject of the community pool and the importance of having, liquidity available in the community pool so we can invest in good opportunities or emergency measures or whatnot. So overall, I think it's a good idea, but whether or not it needs to happen now or in a month or in whatever, I think maybe in a sense we should wait a bit, because we are getting some momentum on the burn tax with Binance, burning their fee and starting to encourage other exchanges to do that. If we, pivot too much in the other direction, that might get some of the other sexes an excuse to just say, nah, but this is where maybe 0.2% is well enough, right? Because the normal trading fee, depending on the exchange, is somewhere around, whatever, 0.0 something percent or whatever, right? So it'll probably be somewhere in the same range, and then it gets evened out so you don't get taxed unfairly either on chain or off chain. But we'll see. I mean, I think again, it's good to experiment with these things. We're still trying to figure out what works. We all agreed that the burn tax would have, a negative consequence. We tried the 1.2%. Again, maybe it was too much, or maybe in a few years we'll find out it's too little, right? And then we'll just go from there.
Yeah, and that was always the idea of making it changeable as well, wasn't it?
I think that's been in the system for a while, but I also think sometimes, I mean, I'm a socialist, right? I'm from Denmark, so that's like socialist heaven. But I think sometimes in our democracies we tend to forget why we actually pay taxes, right? We couldn't build democracies without taxes. In the old days, paying taxes was viewed as a virtue to help, make society stronger. And in the world we live in today, we've come to the point where everybody is trying to avoid taxes because nobody has a shared view on what they want society to become. So from my point of view, if we look at the concepts of Conway's law, as I've mentioned before, with the communication design and general design, and overall of the virtual structures will mimic the real world, then I think inherently, we're going to get closer to a scenario where maybe if we could teach people that decentralized democracy actually requires some taxes to work, and maybe if price goes up, then maybe one day people would pay more taxes than we're doing now.
Yeah, and like you said, the taxes are a normal part of any system. I mean, there has to be taxes in place to pay for things. I mean, in the everyday, life, what's the best example of this? Potholes in the road. That's what taxes. It goes down to as simple as things like that. And I totally agree with
But
you
I
there.
think this is the aspect also of Akujiro's proposal that I really like, right? Which is the fact that some of the taxes now go into maintaining the potholes in the road, right? So we
Yes.
can have a solid driving experience and all of these things. I don't think 0.2% taxes is enough to fix all the holes in the road, but it's a place to start, right?
Yes, definitely. So I'm kind of sat on the fence of this one because it's so hard to gauge what is right, what is wrong. There's pros and cons to both sides, like you're saying as well. And I've been saying this in videos. Are we sending the wrong picture to CEXs? So huge conflict, but we just have to take it as it goes. And that's the beauty of what this whole system is. It's so decentralized that someone like Ajuro can put a parameter change proposal up, get attention on it, get people voting, and put a nice Agora text up that explains everything.
I'm gonna be honest. I'm gonna be honest with you. I don't think the sexes care one bit what we do if we succeed as a decentralized collective. Their business model is fairly simple. They're something between a digital bank, a digital exchange, and a digital VC, right? And that means that their business is to sell tokens, profilate the technology to the masses, and enable these decentralized collectives that they have, basically set out to build in the world through bringing blockchains to the people, because they understand that is the end state they need to get to sort of get their bitcoins and their other coins to the level where they want them. So inherently, they understand that change is a chaotic process. Change is hurtful and painful, but at the other side, you typically have something stronger, better, more beautiful if it didn't get killed off by the chaos of change. And this is where I think the sexes, they just view these things as social experiments, and then they try to support them as best as they can without necessarily losing money. And they try to influence them as best as they can while still allowing them to grow on their own, because they have so many different experiments running at the same time that they're more akin to constant gardeners than the actual master splinter mentor that stands next to you and say, now you need to do this and now you need to do that. So long term, I don't really care too much as long as we succeed when it comes to the dexes or sexes. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I totally, that actually puts it into quite a good perspective for me. They probably don't care, like you're saying, it as long as we, reach what we say and we're going to reach. So, Zaradar, is there much talk about moving the repository to you guys having the canonical one? Because I think it's high time we sort of, start looking to that so we don't have to rely on TFL for much longer. What are your views on that sort of move?
I think it's a bad idea. As I've said before, in proof of stake systems, you want a lot of what we call client diversity. We want many different teams building clients for the chain. Obviously, the state we're in right now, we only have one team. Making our repo the canonical one will probably not be inducive of letting having other teams come in and try and build. But again, on the other hand, it might make things short term simpler. So I understand the push for it. I mean, I've spoken a bit with Jacob about it, the guy from the Osmosis team, and I understand his reasons and ideas behind it, and I inherently don't really care as long as we all agree that the long-term goal is client diversity. And all of the tech guys, including Jacob, agree on that, but we also accept that we have a short-term focus where we just want to get the chain fucking upgraded so we can get the new features, enable the closed IBC channels, and get running with all the other stuff we want to do. So maybe just to make it easier for the network as a whole to relate to and trust and all of that, it might be good to do short term, but long term, we still need to work very focused towards client diversity.
And IBCs are a huge part of that. And for those that don't know, IBCs is inter-blockchain communications. Zaradar, what's the time frame on getting the IBCs back to their original state?
We have the pull request pending. I had unfortunately missed a comment where I needed to fork some Tendermint repos and stuff, so I did that yesterday. And then I think Jacob will do the last few changes and hopefully push all that back to us. And then once we clear that, we need to merge it with some other maintenance things we had to do, including the LCD endpoint gas calculation fix, and get that ready for release. That will probably, I'm still, fairly certain we can make it by the end of this year. If not, maybe, Q1 next year, depending. But there's not a lot of work remaining to be done on Jacob's side. We just have to finalize the review once that does get pushed, and then we will integrate that. And if for some reason that stalls out, then Ed and I have a plan B for how to get the upgrade done. So we have, fairly good path for that. Getting the upgrade released also gonna be pretty efficient, I think. We've already done one release, and we've been doing a lot of communication with the validators over the months, so we have pretty strong relations with them right now, which makes it a lot easier. A lot of them are sharing a lot more information with us regarding the state of the network as a whole and the ecosystem as a whole. So that obviously makes us a lot more informed about a lot of things. So I'm not too concerned about these things. My primary concern is the work that we have to do afterwards, because we will not be able to deliver on the swap system by the end of the year. Because unfortunately, one of the upgrade requirements from the Osmosis team's side was that we had to disable all of the customizations on top of Cosmos SDK and then re-implement them, because TFL diverged a bit off from the main branch of Cosmos SDK in the main Cosmos repo, which means that upgrading the fork will, or upgrading the Cosmos SDK will create a lot of breaking changes in the code. And I already know this because I actually did the upgrade myself a few weeks back just to see what the consequences would be in terms of the refactoring, as we call it. So we just had to accept that having not to do one part of work, then, we might have to disable something so we can do that afterwards. But we always had to do that work anyways. And this is also why, I think somehow the timing with the whole USTC repeg proposal was actually pretty good, because that amounts to a massive rewrite of the swap system anyways. So most likely what will happen is the swap system will be entirely disabled, and then the coins will basically just be available in their wallets, and you can transact them around and stuff like that. But there will not be, any swap mechanics available until what would then be version 24.
And V24, if I remember rightly, we're looking at V23 around Christmas time, correct? V24
Yes.
around Q1 of 2023.
No. V24 is for summer.
Ooh, summertime. That'd be really nice. And this is what I like about you, Zaradar. You're never rushed. Nothing's ever a rush for you. It's always just been a flow. That you're like water. You manage to mold into any kind of shape. And I've always said this, you're always there many times for myself whenever I need advice with anything. We're blessed to have you. We really are. So, Zaradar, that Terra Shuttle's back up, right?
Yeah, I heard about it.
Yeah, so it's back up and running now, which I think is really good, because it was a doorway in itself, isn't it, to other blockchains. And Cosmos itself, how many networks are there that run on the Cosmos SDK? Because it's not just us, is it?
I have no
I think
clue. I think we have like, I don't know, you go ahead with your number.
I think the main networks, I think it's like 6, and then you have loads of these kind of like branch outs underneath through the SDK. I don't quite like hold me to that, but I thought you'd know a lot better than I did. But
No, I mean, we have, I think we only have one Cosmos chain running in our setup, but then I think there's some derivatives, but I know that we have more than 50 IBC channels, right? And an IBC channel is typically to some other place. So I don't know, I guess 20, 30, 40. The problem is it's so easy to spin up, right? I mean, if you want to make a new Cosmos SDK chain, I did it as a parting present for my last employer. I spun up a Cosmos SDK chain for them in a day. I said, here you go. Go do your own thing and close down all your payment systems, as I've told you to do for years, right? Because they're in the business of sailing around with ships, and having broadband on ships is a fucking pain in the ass. So if your customers can just transact in your own token on the ship, and then you just settle it on the end, then you save a lot of money, right? So inherently spinning up a Cosmos SDK chain is not that hard. And I mean, there's like more than 20,000 blockchains out there by now. 3 weeks ago, I helped a non-tech friend of mine from Australia set up a new proof of work chain that he wanted to run. We haven't, we probably don't even know half of the Cosmos SDK chains being developed or even available at the moment. That's what I'm trying to say, I think.
I never really thought about how you just said you spun up a network for your previous employer so they could, integrate it onto a ship. That's actually an insane way to use, blockchain technology. So Zaradar, kind of going back to your idea of a repeg, and in the most solid environment, say it all went according to plan, what would be the final product of what you believe it would reach? What is the end goal here on this?
Oh, that's a dangerous question.
I
Because
know, I
if I
know.
say it, it'll become the reality on Twitter tomorrow. I think that the world has 27 trillion something dollars worth of liquidity flowing around in various, commodities and instruments and currencies and whatnot. There's 10 billion USDC in circulation. I mean, the math is pretty obvious if we succeed, right? I think one of the things I said earlier was that we either go big or we go home. So definitely $1. Let's just go there. Maybe even more if we don't mint new USTC. Again, if USTC is an algorithmic token, it's probably just meant to be more like sound money again, meaning that it has low volatility. But right now, we would still be in a price discovery phase from a crypto perspective, because the normal maturing phase for any, proper bottle of crypto wine is somewhere around 8 to 10 years, and we're nowhere near that yet. So let's see. I mean, but again, it's all down to what utility we build on chain. If the next Fortnite sets up shop on the Terra network, then $1 isn't enough, right? I mean, it comes down to people's ingenuity and the vast marvels of a changing, chaotic world where everybody have their own ideas, and we don't really know what the next big thing is going to be.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I actually done a video on this. Like, there's nothing to stop USTC going above $1 now, is there? Like, it could just keep going.
Wow, I think once you see it reaching those levels, obviously first the people who've been hodling USDC, they would be incentivized to sell along the way to, just book some profits. But LUNC holders would probably also pile in by swapping LUNC into USDC to cool off the USDC market. So I think it would find a natural equilibrium between its, let's call it liquidity floor, and whatever, ceiling that the market determines is fair for that particular token in the context of its network effect and the utility it provides and the amount of end users and the amount of successful businesses using the technology and so on, and the token.
Yeah, I'm hugely excited because no one ever knows what's around the corner, and this has just been one ride of like, could this actually happen? And then we get to it and it's like, Jesus, this is happening. Okay, we're here now, we're there now. And I believe that you guys should be paid. Now I've got the Open Collective website up in front of me, Zaradar, where you can become a financial contributor. So I just want to make sure that anybody watching this video, if you feel like you want to be a contributor, a backer sponsor, or just a donation or a crypto contribution, know that that option is there, and it will help, ensure that these guys have a future as to which they can keep providing for the blockchain, because this is not even the beginning of the road. Like, we're so early into crypto, aren't we, Zaradar, that it's kind of like buying into Amazon when they were selling books. That's how I kind of see it. You have the potential, not saying, you're going to become rich or anything like that, but this is such a new creation. It's so experimental. Like, there's so many ways.
I would say that we are somewhere around the stage where Amazon was a successful online book retailer. but before they became a successful online everything retailer, right? Because that's really where their business went into the stratosphere and just went to the moon. So yeah, I mean, I think the world's crypto population is like 10% saturation or something like that now, maybe a bit less. So yeah, there's lots of, people who haven't bought crypto or bought into crypto, but this is why I keep saying that for me, the next bull run will be the business bull run, because what we attracted in this bull cycle, other than Wall Street money and some more serious investors, was also a lot of 401k style people who were looking to buy something, but they might not be in the business of buying ETFs anymore because that market was too pumped up or whatever. So they bought into crypto, and now probably a lot of these people are looking at saying, how can we now connect our new investment into something that provides greater returns, which means people will be integrating it into their local pizzerias or whatever, drugstores or taxi services or whatever you can think of, because inherently it's an efficient technology, right? It basically provides an alternative to the buy a PSP gateway terminal from some vendor and pay them X amount of your earnings per year or whatnot. So yeah, I think that's going to be the next thing, and that is going to take us from 10 to 30 or 40% saturation. And then we will probably level out there for a while, and then people will probably sell off, and then I think we will reach full crypto exposure when we become a truly interplanetary species, like Elon Musk likes to call it, because inherently the easiest way to send value to Mars is with crypto. I mean, it's going to cost you more to send gold to Mars than the gold is worth. Can't really send money either, it's the same problem, but you could send crypto using, a string of interconnected satellites that were all just running their own small proof of stake validator nodes, right?
Yeah. And we know, well, I know this, I don't know if you know this, but I know that on Mars, from what they've been doing from tests, there is a high concentrate of gold up there as well. And then we have the same thing with Elon Musk want to capture a meteor to pretty much harvest the materials on it, which is absolutely insane. So there's not to say, that gold couldn't crumble in value once we do become interplanetary species.
There's one, the meteor you're talking about is the one that is worth more than the entire world's wealth combined plus more, right? It would instantly crash all the gold markets if you
Yeah.
somehow gain the ability to mine it. But space mining is not a new thing, right? If you look back 4 or 5 years, there was a lot of companies that got a lot of VC money to start out space mining. Most of them have gone bankrupt today. But I think the new sort of drive by companies like Virgin Galactic and SpaceX and so on will, give life to the idea of space mining again, and then it will be up to us to figure out if we can solve the challenge of, efficiently flying mining equipment to a flying asteroid and landing on it. I mean, we probably all saw Armageddon, and I can tell you it's not that easy, right? So the whole, is it really worth it? How are we going to capture it? Are we going to knock it out of the sky, right? I think recently NASA was experimenting with trying to notch an asteroid to see how that works, right? But what if we did that in the wrong way? That could have catastrophic effects. So I think it's going to be a while before we start mining meteors. But
Yeah.
you never know.
Yeah, that's the thing. You just don't know what's going to go on next. But the one thing I do know, Zaradar, from being in crypto as long as I have been, is the way a lot of people haven't actually seen, these euphoric bull runs, so to speak. And we're in a huge bear market, but we're building strength. We have a community that is so strong and so collected as to under one banner, so to speak. But the way we're positioning ourselves now is looking really good for when this bull run does come around.
Yeah, I mean, I think it seems like we are, going in a good direction, but you never know with these things, right? Then all of a sudden something, maybe a new war starts somewhere else, and then everybody sells off their risk assets again, and then it's back to square zero, like in Monopoly, or you go to jail or something like that, right? So, but in the current trajectory, I think we're, on a solid path. I think there's a bit too much thought going on and drama, but I've come to accept that that's just the way of things when there's not news coming out, right? I mean, we can't write and produce features fast enough to keep the news cycle happy. That's a given. And that means that people start, inherently talking about whether or not, terror rebels is breaking up, even if that matters at all, right? It doesn't even matter, it doesn't matter at all if that did happen, but it's not going to happen short term, not even medium or long term from what I can see. But the bottom line is that people get bored and then they start doing all sorts of other things. And this worries me a bit, right? Because it creates a bad image. And I'm not going to say that I don't always, I participate in some of these public debates myself. I typically only do it if I feel like there's a need to set the record straight or to basically express my views to avoid, some general direction. But I think we should maybe consider that, people like Alex and we've become fairly good friends over the last 4 or 5 months, right? Why we might argue once in a while, we still work together, we still talk together, right? It's just normal. And in the way that I see it, we're kind of like a band of brothers, and we might split into smaller groups, but we will always be working for the same goal and towards the same sort of end state. So I think long term, Terra Rebels will probably transform into more of an umbrella organization where you will then have smaller DAOs that work under this banner together with different areas of responsibility. It will be all more decentralized. This is back to some of the talks we had, back in the days almost, because it feels like ages ago. But when we talked about the whole Terra TV and the idea of creating, independent institutions, that's sort of the same that we also, I think, are trying to do within our setup to make ourselves more, resilient and more decentralized and so on. So I think overall, yes, we're going in the right direction. There's a hiccup here and there, but the network keeps growing. We keep attracting, new people who come in with ideas and questions. Unfortunately, we can't service all of them, but thankfully we have other, people showing up, teams showing up, saying, "Hey, we don't mind taking some of the DApp work off your shoulders and helping some of these startups." And I'm like, great, then I get more time to focus on the platform. So please, by all means. And that's also for me a healthy sign in the sense that allows us to, shift stuff over to whatever other teams who might want to help make this network great again. Because this is what gives us decentralization. This is what gives us momentum. If everybody sits around all day and wait for me and Ed to do everything, then we're all going to be very old men and women and everything before we, are done.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean that's I'm positive, but I'm also sometimes a bit saddened that people can't just enjoy the fact that the LUNC price is up 500%, and
And the
the
rest.
USTC price is up a few hundred, whatever. It's going in the right direction. I
We're
mean, the market is
moving.
clearly telling us that, and the market is the one thing that rarely ever lies. And then if the people could become a bit more professional and be a bit less fuddish and work more towards focusing on fewer things and completing them, which is also something that we sometimes struggle with inside Terror Rebels because we're a pretty big organization right now. But the whole thing of staying focused and saying, okay, let's get the upgrade done. Let's not spend the next 2 months, pestering Ed and Marventus and Zaradar and all the other guys and the moderators with all sorts of irrelevant questions. The roadmap is there. Ask about what's on the near-term roadmap. Don't ask about if we can deliver some arbitrary idea because you made it up, right? That helps us stay focused. So if as a whole, as a community, we could be a lot more focused on doing, one thing right and then doing the next thing, which is what I like to call maintaining agility, then I think we would have more momentum, right? And this kind of goes back to what you said earlier. The reason why I'm so fucking chill is because I spent the last 20 years trolling agile coaches, because I know these processes are all about making people feel good about themselves, right? At the end of the day, what works is taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And that's called agility. That's not agile, that's agility. It's something entirely different. And if you practice agility in everything you do, then you don't really get knocked out of course, because you're not really necessarily going down a set path. You're just going towards an end goal. And along that way, you will have challenges and problems and victories and successes. And if you let them knock you out of course, then you lose, right? So the only thing you can do is just 2 steps forward and 1 step back.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there. And going on to this whole idea of new people joining the space, the movement, the blockchain, we are getting ever so close now. It's 14 days until new validators can come on board. Zara, do you believe this is going to be a good thing? Or do you think it's going to, is this going to be the next stage of growth, do you think?
Definitely, it's gonna let us fill out the validator set, right? So I think what will happen is that the set will fairly quickly fill up to 130, and then we will probably see a short-term, let's call it arms race, where the people in the bottom 25 percentile or something like that will try to, attract more delegation power. They might even go and buy some more tokens themselves. This will obviously put upwards pressure on the price. So I believe that when the whole staking thing kicks in, we'll probably experience some sort of short-term price surge, unless unless it's already baked in which it will be a sell the news event. But that remains to be seen.
Yeah, it definitely does. No one's got a crystal ball. I can always, vouch for that. But going towards projects and utility use cases and things like this across the board, I know Vegas has just released a kind of like a Telegram application as to which you can tip each other with Lunar Classic. And I'm working on a project which should change the way people burn coins, and I'm working on this with Strafe. So we're going to be bringing that forward soon, but new validators coming on board should stem to more projects. And, I see each validator kind of as like a faction. Each one's got their own like route that they're walking. They've got their own ideas of what they want to do, but they're contributing in their own way. So each validator in themselves is so important, and without them, just the blockchain just doesn't run as efficiently as it can. So Zaradar, what would you say to people about delegating? Is it a thing, people should be staking all with one node? Should they be spreading their delegations? What do you think?
I mean, personally, I go for low voting power, high uptime delegators, right? So like 3 weeks ago, I withdrew like, I don't know, 40% of my delegated tokens. And then it obviously, takes 21 days to clear. And then I redelegated it with another smaller validator who I have a nice relationship with, and whom I think is very professional and didn't have a very high, voting power percentile compared to where I moved the delegation from. Right. So I think in general, it's important to sometimes move your delegations around, even though you won't get your auto compounding and you will, maybe get stuck for a few days if whatever. Or I mean, you can redelegate obviously, but the point is, it's important to move these things around. And I think that that will help decentralize the network more as well. Because if we all ended up staking with the same top 10 people, then the rest would die from starvation, literally, and that would just leave us with only 10 different providers, even though these providers, they operate multiple data centers. That still doesn't really change the fact that it still reduces the amount of data centers we have around the world.
Yeah, it becomes unprofitable for a validator at a point where they just can't get enough EP. And yeah, it's always good to spread your delegation, folks. But like Zaradar was saying, understand who you're delegating with and, what their movements are and things like that. So realistically, Zaradar, what is, is there anything you'd like to say to the community? Any kind of message you'd like to get out there? I've got your Twitter account up and stuff like that. So if anybody wants to follow Zaradar, you've got that there. Do set the notifications on. He puts really relevant stuff up. But is there anything you'd like to get out there, Zaradar?
I mean, I just think people need to keep, focusing on building value. Stop trying to materialize stuff out of thin air, because that's not the point we're at. And, try to have productive discussions with one another, be inclusive to the point that it's possible for you. And, just know that we don't have a fixed timeline, in the sense that we want to finish something and leave. I think for the people who are still here, most of us, this is now becoming an integrated part of our life, akin to a hobby, right? So we're not going anywhere short term, unless, of course, God forbid, something unfortunate would happen, even though I'm an atheist, but that's another talk. So I think, just chill out, man. Enjoy the fact that we're going in the right direction. Ignore the FUD, because people are working as best as they can with the type of setup that we have and so on, to fix things. People are people. They will argue sometimes and get into conflicts. That is the nature of relationships, but at the end of the day, people will also mend fences and find ways back to one another, and start working together. I mean, take a good example from my own world. I've started working quite a lot with Radar recently, even though we had a falling out a few months ago, over something that inherently probably was just due to drama at the end of the day, right? So yeah, if people are just committed to doing the right work, and they work in the right direction, then eventually we will all, get back to one another and say, hey, I said something stupid, or I did something stupid, and I'm really kind of sorry, but we're all in this boat together. So either we can sit in each of our corners and sulk at each other for eternity, or we can get past that and move on and make this thing great again, right? So when at least now, especially on Twitter, I see a lot of people talking about, terror rebels breaking up and conflict. Again, change is chaos. Chaos is conflict. Conflict is the way of life. So yeah, but we are on the right path. So just chillax and enjoy life.
I 100% agree with that. And that's the most important thing is we all started this together, and we didn't start this to achieve fame, glory, money, power. We all started it to help fix a problem that was thrown on the floor by, the previous people who were dealing with it all. So no, I really appreciate you, Zaradar, and I really appreciate you coming on for this podcast episode. Folks, thank you so much for tuning in. We really appreciate it. That's goodbye from me. Goodbye from Zaradar. And
Okay, guys.
We'll catch you in the next one. Shoop.
So do you get a